Y'all, this is part 2 of the Porphyria notes on sponges for honor zoology. So we're just going to continue on here. First up is sponge reproduction. Many sponges are going to undergo asexual reproduction, which means they're going to branch or buds will break off and grow into separate sponges that are identical to the original one. So they're technically genetic clones of each other. All right. Some sponges will reproduce sexually, and this will occur when both sexes release gametes into the water during spawning season. If you don't remember what a gamete is from biology, it's a haploid cell, meaning it's a sperm or an egg. So it's got half the amount of the DNA that the full organism would have, that functions in sexual reproduction. And then the union of the two gametes of the opposite sex, right, produces that zygote. So the haploid cells are the sperm and the egg separately, and then they join together and then and produce that zygote. All right. Spawning is the production or depositing of large quantities of egg and sperm in the water. So we talked about this briefly already in the last unit, but sponges that undergo sexual reproduction are technically spawning, and there's other organisms that spawn as well, such as fish and frogs, as well as clams. All right. A zygote, when you hear that term, that is a diploid cell produced by the fusion of an egg and sperm. It is a fertilized egg cell, technically. So it's once the sperm is a haploid cell, the egg is a haploid, and then they form together to make a zygote, and that is a diploid cell. So haploid cells have half the DNA. So for humans, we have 23 in the sperm, 23 chromosomes in the egg, and then they fuse together. So then in humans, we have 46. Other animals have different amounts of DNA. Right. So most sponges can produce both male and female gametes in the same individual, and this is called monocitus. So they can produce both eggs and sperm. Right. Some are diaciduous, meaning that they have separate sexes in each individual. So they're either male or female. They cannot produce both. All right. So some are going to be able to produce sperm and eggs. Some are going to produce one or the other. All right. Once the egg is fertilized, a larval will form. The larval is an immature stage that may undergo a dramatic change in structure before changing to the adult body form. So it's kind of like a toddler stage. For sponges, after no more than 2 days of free swimming existence, the larval will settle to the substrate, meaning the ground or some other surface that it's going to grow on, and develops into the adult form. So for sponges, that larval stage, they are free swimming, and then they go find somewhere to live and then take root there. So you can kind of see that through here. Both reproductions of sponges. So on this side, we have asexual reproduction. It buds off. That bud eventually breaks off. It goes and finds somewhere to land and makes a new sponge. If it reproduces sexually, it gives off the eggs or the sperm, either both or one or the other. It's fertilized, it turns into an embryo, it eventually turns into the larval stage, and eventually goes and finds somewhere to land, all right, and grow up into be an adult, all right? Moving on, now let's talk about some different types of sponges. So we talked about body forms in the last set of sponge notes. Now we're going to talk about some different types. And these aren't all the types, these are just a few of them. So the first type is the encrusting sponge. They form thin, brightly colored growths on rocks or dead coral. Their class name is written here, but you do not need to memorize that class name. It's just if you're honestly really curious what they're called. But just know they're called encrusting, and these are some different pictures. You can see they're generally kind of low, like grow pretty low to the ground, and they can be pretty brightly colored and very pretty. All right. Next up is glass sponges. These live in deep water and have skeletons of fused silica spicules. Like these guys. These are really fascinating to me. I think they're very pretty, and they're very normally have a very symmetrical design built into them. But they have that very strong spicules in them to survive the pressure of being in that deep ocean water. All right. Next up is my favorite named sponges, the boring sponges. These guys are not named for being plain and ordinary, but rather they bore thin channels through oyster shells and corals. So if you've ever seen some seashells with a lot of tiny little holes like this, it probably was attacked by a boring sponge. Also, their name is just ironic to me. So anyway, this is a picture of live boring sponges. They're kind of like flat and yellow like that. Next up is coralline sponges. These guys have a calcium carbonate skeleton that forms under the body, and they're once thought to be extinct, but have since been found in caves and on steep coral reefs and reef slopes. So there's a variety of what they look like in colors and shapes, and these are just a few pictures of coralline sponges. And then the last thing to talk about is commercial importance. So bath sponges are often harvested and used to bathe with, and these are just some examples. There's a town in Florida on the Gulf Coast called Tarpon Springs, and they have a little local economy of, I guess you'd call them fishermen of sorts, and they go out and harvest sponges and bring them back. So they're in their town is the sponge docks where you can go, and there's a lot of shops that sell them. Sponges are also used in medical, and some will act as antibiotics, and others will have pain-killing properties. And a lot of scientists are still researching these properties because sponges do grow back quickly and reproduce frequently. They're easy for us to use if they have some kind of medical purpose. They're a good thing to use because they do reproduce frequently. Right. And then a lot of them, they're still researching the cancer killing properties within some sponges as well. But that is it for the sponge notes. Let me know if you guys have any questions.